Hey everybody, it's Dan Morey with Staffing Monthly, and welcome to this issue where we're taking a deep dive into strategic planning. And we're actually going to be addressing something in the strategic plan that most staffing agencies don't give enough priority to. They don't pay close enough attention to it. And right now, when we've all been struggling with where revenues are, where the market is, how it's softened, and how and it makes me cringe to say this, how we're starting to accept that flat is the new growth mindset, it might be difficult to go out and replace that 5 million or $10 million of revenue, staffing revenue that you lost last year and the million or $2 million of gross margin that came with it. So we have to start thinking about other lines of business to be able to do that. And one of the ways that I feel like most staffing agencies have missed on is incorporating a really healthy direct hire perm placement line of business within their staffing organization. So because I believe this, I went out and I found the best authority in the industry to talk about how do you really develop your recruiter business. And not only is he the founder of Recruiter U that teaches systems of exactly how to do this, he literally wrote the book that you can see on the screen here in a minute, Grow Your Recruiting Business. And this is Mike Gionta, and he is the known authority on growing the direct hire and permanent placement practice in the industry. And he's here today to share with us, how does a staffing agency incorporate these same strategies into our overall strategic plan? So, Mike, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure. I appreciate the invitation, Dan.
So before we hit record, we had a great conversation talking about how the grass is always greener on the other side, how staffing agencies always want the margin of direct hire business, how direct hire firms want the consistency and the kind of the transactional side of the staffing business. We're here to talk about the staffing side. How do we get some of that green grass from the recruiting side? So what is your approach? What is, just from a high level, can it be done? Can a staffing agency really build out a strong recruiting perm placement line of business?
Yes, and we've had clients that have done that. We've had staffing clients come to us because they were really good at staffing and they wanted to complement their business, to be more holistic with their client base. So, there's a couple ways to do it. There's the low end way of you ask your existing staffing clients what they need on the permanent side, right? The challenge is a lot of really good staffing contracts come from talent acquisition and human resources, where really good perm business comes from the hiring manager, him or herself, right? Because and so a lot of times is, what I would recommend, the ideal way to do it is if you're like, I am set on building a perm placement practice within my business. They are, as you know, Dan, these are two different businesses.
Yes.
A staffing firm and a recruiting firm, although they're all involved with talent. The same people, 90% of the people that would look at a contract job wouldn't look at permanent and vice versa.
Correct.
So you're dealing with a different pool of talent, the same pool of companies, because most companies have, they hire both.
Yeah.
I would probably, if I were starting a perm placement practice, the easiest way is probably to take your existing salespeople, and if you're the salesperson, is to start asking about, especially in the areas where you're competent, engineering, marketing, sales, whatever, is what is available on the perm side? Where do they need help? Where are the biggest challenges? You can almost even make it like a hiring survey. A lot of times when we coach someone that wants to establish even a brand new niche in a new industry, to put together a list of 25 or 30 hiring managers and create a hiring survey. Dan, over the next 6 months, on the permanent side, you plan to increase, decrease, or maintain staff size? What are the two biggest challenging positions you've had in your role in your department under your authority? And then maybe one or two other, do you see the economy improving, staying the same, getting worse? Just 3 questions. It takes a couple minutes. You compile that data. Again, like 30 people, you can send out a white paper. When you talk about doing a hiring survey, it's a great way to get in and to get market insight beyond what your gut tells you. Because your gut might say, I think there's this huge opportunity for perm placement in engineering. And you talk to these people and 75% of them say, we're going to decrease staff size on with our permanent team.
Mhm.
With any one of those surveys, you're going to have, if you talk to 30 people, you'll have five that'll tell you the world's going to hell. You're going to have five that are going to tell you it's the best economy ever. But you look in that middle where you're going to hear the most common responses, and that'll give you kind of uh, the temperature of what that niche is. And then you're going to want to go deeper. And, we always advise, I advise on the permanent placement side to target companies less than $250 million in revenue. Why? There's not a lot of HR infrastructure. There's not 6 layers of talent acquisition, internal recruiters. You're going to have more access to the hiring managers, less bureaucracy, and I found from my experience, much more flexibility in fees. So I know I just puked out a lot at you, Dan, but that's kind of like those are some quick starting points.
So I love that. So the two actionable insights that I pulled out of that quickly to recap. I love the hiring survey concept. I think that's great because you can do a lot with it. You can learn a lot, which is important for any decision. But then you can also share the insights with those people that contributed because they tend to want to know what the market's doing. So I love that feedback. And just to make sure I heard you right, did you say you target companies that are less than $250 million in revenue? Is there a minimum side? Like, have you found companies that like below a certain level of revenue, they just don't engage much, or maybe they don't have the stomach for the fees?
Well, I wouldn't probably call the local baker, but when I say zero revenue, I mean it from like on the tech side. I did a lot in on my desk. We did a lot of recruiting on venture funded startups. They hadn't released a product yet, right? So if you're looking like
But they're funded. They're funded.
they're funded, correct. So, but that's zero revenue, but funded, right? So, as you know, a venture capitalist is going to say, we're going to give you $10 million. We want you to build out your engineering team. We want you to build out accounting and finance or whatever, and then be able to go to phase two when you're ready to do the product launch. I've actually, um, and even in your slow growth firms, we have clients that are placing lawyers and boutique law firms, placing consultants in boutique consulting firms. So I don't see like, I wouldn't put a revenue cutoff. Um,
Okay.
like I said, I wouldn't be calling the local baker, but people that, you'd be surprised at a few $1 million, and especially if they're a growth oriented company, and this is where it's total serendipity. It wasn't strategic. I got out on the ground floor of some of these companies, and I ended up working with them from the time they were 5 million and building out their sales team till they were $250 million company.
So that's fascinating. And one of your strategies that you mentioned is something that I've heard more of over the last couple of years, and that's actually getting in with the private equity folks or the venture folks or the ones that are actually like they're investing in companies and they want to make sure that those companies have access to talent. So they're bringing the capital, but they very much understand that you can put a lot of good money in an organization, but if you don't have the right people to execute, that money's burnt. So I've heard that a lot lately. How do you, if you were going to target that, if that was going to be your strategy, like how do you go about approaching them? Like how would you do that being the expert if you wanted to develop a nice little niche in that kind of sector?
Well, there's two ways. One, I started targeting venture capitalists after I had a footprint with some tech companies and I
Okay.
had a little bit of street credibility. Like
Okay.
the beauty of a tech startup is um, you'll talk to the CEO, right? He or she's going to want help, right, in the early stages, and you might even be talking to them about developing, their management team, and especially if you know the niche a little bit, you can be helpful. And if you don't know the niche, that's okay. Don't make statements. Stay in question mode, right? Right. In question mode, you never reveal your ignorance. Um, but once I started uh, if I was talking to you, Dan, and you were the CEO of a startup, I would say, regarding regardless of what position I was filling for you, if I meet or exceed your expectations on this search, and I would help them, I would say, let's look at what that looks like. What does meeting and exceeding your expectations on the search look like for you? Take notes on that. If I do that, part of my fee is for you to introduce me to your venture partners.
Mhm.
um, quick, phone call or Zoom link. If you have a virtual board meeting, bring me in for 5 minutes, talk about what I did in your own way. because that's one of the ways I grow my business is by helping great guys like you, and then your friends, in their portfolio. And then you're kind of viral, right? Because a venture capitalist can't say to you, Dan, you must use Mike Gionta as your recruiting firm, but they're going to say, we've heard really good things about this guy, Mike Gionta. He's working with a couple other guys. You should use him, which is pretty much like the Godfather saying, you know,
Yeah,
well, the
yeah,
management team
absolutely.
gets to make their own decisions, but when you come in recommended, it's a whole new world. You get to work on your terms. You get to set it up your way, your process. You're not a resume mill. You're a consultant.
Especially if you're recommended by the people supplying the money. If you
Yes.
come in recommended like that. So with that, like Crunchbase, like is that like a lead source? Do you like look at Crunchbase and look at companies that have just gotten funded and like see maybe who is the most active in a space and like okay, what are the venture groups or the investors that are actually like participating in these rounds? Like, is that
Every time I forgot what the database was that I used to use 20 years ago. That's one of the ones we coach our clients to use now. Is I would get the daily wire, and I would do a little research. So I wouldn't just say, "Hey, I saw you got $10 million in Series A funding," um, but I would, knowing the space a little bit, I would talk about that, and I'd send them like a quick email where I try to get them on the phone, going, um, with that, what are the challenges your venture partner gave you? What are your benchmarks that you got to hit? I'm here to help. How do I say, whether you need me as a recruiter right now, I've been in the space for 15 years. I can give you some ideas.
I
And
love
that's what I think what it's imperative on the perm side. So many recruiters, and it's the way we're taught, it's not anyone's fault, come in with this commodity approach. Do you have any openings I can help you fill? It's like walking into retail. When you walk in, can I help you? And you say, you say, knee jerk. No, I'm just looking, right? And you move on. Um, this is when you come in, you go, look, I know you're in the early stages. I just saw you got funding. I want to be here as a resource for you. Hopefully I earn the right to help you build out some of your team, not get openings. Hopefully I earn the right to help you build your team. And I don't imagine you have anything right now you need, but do you need any insights, like compensation ideas? If you haven't built out a sales plan, I know what people are paying. I can give you some rough ideas and help you construct that. You just come in, like as a mentor taught me, is almost like a certain, you come in with a napkin, like on your, like you're a waiter. I'm here to help.
I like that. I like that. So that's great practice on kind of the client getting side or maybe some perspective there. So maybe switching focus. So once let's say we get some of these clients, or maybe we're using the hiring survey with our existing clients, and we're starting to get some orders in there. It's different type of recruiting, right? It's not recruiting for like staffing and kind of that production level. So what are some of the paramount fundamentals that a direct hire recruiter needs to be doing that might be different than staffing?
So I'm going to use this word because I hate it. Pitch. Recruiters want to pitch jobs at candidates. And for the most part, even though the economy is a little softer than it was, a year, 18 months ago, there's still good demand for talent. There's still competition for talent. And candidates are used to me calling up going, Dan, I'm working with a startup. They're like the greatest ever. They're funded by these three big venture companies, and they're super, super, super good. And, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of times recruiters unwittingly, they're basically reading their role back that they're currently doing to them.
Yeah.
My approach is this is candidate approach is all about uncovering if there's a gap in their career on the perm side. Dan, I learned this line from a guy named Peter Lefkowitz decades ago. I think it's one of the best approaches to a candidate. I have no idea, Dan, what's going on in your career right now. I just wanted to reach out to you kind of quietly and confidentially to see if you're at all open to hearing about something that could potentially be stronger than your current situation. What are your thoughts on that? Now, most people are going to say, well, I'm always open, right?
Yeah.
Um, 90% are going to tell you I'm always open. The mistake here is where someone go, great, I've got this opening that described the opening. I know I called you, Dan, but there's no such thing as a perfect company or perfect opportunity. If you had to describe one or two minor imperfections in your current role, what would those be? Not are there any? What would those be? Because no gap, no sale. Like if you start going, I don't know, Mike, you know what? I just got promoted. I got like a 50% raise. I'm working on leading edge technology. The founder here is like a personal mentor to me. I've been to his daughter's wedding. Like you start hearing all this stuff, you're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason to sell you. I'm like, congratulations, you're happy. But if I hear, we're falling like 2 or 3 levels behind our competitors in technology. I'm not seeing anything coming out of engineering that's going to fix that anytime soon. Then they're talking about raising quotas or whatever, the role is. And how's that affect you? Say more. How so? Say more. How so? Say more. And basically, what I call it is a career wound, and it's like a scab. They weren't really in pain when you called, but if there's a wound there and I pick at it, I make it more painful. And then I want to uncover what are those gaps? What are the things that are less than perfect? And then I can uh, and then I can flip it to, Dan, if you could hand carve the next step in your career, what does that look like for you? Right. So I've got the dissatisfaction now. I've got a vision for the future. And again, I want to make sure I rail this in pretty specifically. And people might be thinking, well, that takes a lot of time. Yeah, because you're going to charge $30,000 for this product,
Yeah.
right? And you got to find 4 or 5 of them to get one. But the whole thing here is this is what most recruiters aren't doing is they get to hear the most wonderful voice on the planet, their own, which bonds them to you. Uh, and in any form of any sale, I forgot where I read this. The one who, from a buyer's perspective, the one who understands my problem the best is probably the one to solve it.
Yeah.
That's why I stay in question. So when you get to all that, now I've heard what the imperfections are. I've heard a vision for the future. Now I talk about my opportunity and I can make it in alignment that solves this and solves that.
So I love that bridge approach. I think it's great. And I think something you said in there, Mike, is I believe is one of the roadblocks to this working out for a lot of staffing agencies that try to incorporate it is do what you said. It sounds like you got to spend a lot of time with a candidate. And when you're doing production staffing, it's really about efficacy and
Yep.
candidate flow. It's like, hey, how do we get really efficient at like screening these people and then tagging, categorizing, whatever, and then triaging however we need to do to know who's the people we go back to for interviews. And it's like, it's almost like what's the most amount of time that you can spend with someone, while still getting through all of your other targets. Whereas here, and if you take that same mindset into direct hire recruiting, it's like, holy cow, you just spent 30 minutes just not even pitching a role to somebody. Like, what's that going to do? But ultimately, you are getting, so you got to almost treat the time investment and align it to the financial reward for getting it, just like you might take the aggregate time investment on the production staffing side to the aggregate margin reward there. So I think you hit that on the head as to why some people might actually be held back from pursuing this.
It's
So
an entire it's on the flip side too, is you get recruiters on the perm side that are so used to that process, they can't keep up in a staffing because it's different metrics.
yeah,
It's inventory. It's time to how quick can you get to the candidate?
yeah. How does it? What's your best practice for sourcing and that workflow? Like I've seen obviously with the digital age coming in full force, there's a lot of companies out there that are like, hey, let us do all of your outreach. Like you just tell us your key roles, kind of have a face of the franchise that's going to be your deal maker on the direct hire side, but then they got this machine behind the scenes that's like outsource people in the Philippines or Australia or South Africa or the other side of the world from the States. And they're doing kind of all of the prep work. They're sending all of the prospecting messages out on LinkedIn, and they're kind of doing all of that, sort of funneling people in to this singular point. Like that's a model I'm hearing a lot about. Like, is that something that's got merit, or what's the best way to really set up a team structure to make sure that you can actually incorporate the BD strategies you've mentioned, the candidate strategies you mentioned? Like, what's the team structure that's going to work with
But
that?
you bring up a really good one because the recruiter you merged with Next Level Exchange in August and creating kind of the largest training consulting company on the perm placement side. And we also simultaneously, a company we worked with at the Recruiter U that Next Level also worked with, we came into a strategic relationship with a company called High Connects. Uh,
Yeah.
the owner, if you've heard of them, the owner, the president is based in California, and they've got a phenomenal team in Brazil and the Philippines. So what they'll do, and that you bring it up because this is where I see things going. In talking with Jeff Kay, the founder of Next Level, when he and I got into the business in the early 90s, you could go out. It was easier to hire somebody early in their career to do all this cold calling, banging it out. And then you had a career path for them. They can make a lot of money. It's not that that's gone. It's harder for people, us here as owners in the States, to attract those people for those lower end jobs. Where in the Philippines, you can hire people on a fixed cost basis. No, we encourage our clients to pay them a bonus or a commission, things like that. But I can say, I just want you to source and get me appointments with qualified candidates. And I can give you that question, right? Just that question I just gave you. No idea what's going on in your career. They can go through those first few questions. They speak, when you hire the right company to outsource this with, they speak phenomenal English. They're all college educated. Um, and then they pass the lead on to you. And what I've seen with my clients, just like any recruiter in the office, as their skills evolve, they put more and more. So now, not just get me appointments with people that might be qualified, tell me they're qualified. We'll go over them, prep them for the interview, and take it up a level. On the flip side, same thing on business development, right? Uh, Go out and there's several approaches for business development you can use on the perm side, and set me up with appointments with people that have an opening.
I love it. I love it, man. I think that's a great spot to land the plane today. I think you hit three key areas. You kind of talked about some business development strategies about how you get in the space. How do you actually act like you belong in the space, even if you don't have experience, by asking more questions and not making statements and hide your ignorance, which I think is great. Some tools and resources to look at, like Crunchbase, and ways to approach people with value first, like the waiter versus trying to pitch them. And speaking of not pitching, don't pitch the candidate. I like the tactics that you outlined there. And then actually sharing to be open-minded about team structure, is that you don't have to build it all right here in the States, where certain parts of the process can be outsourced globally at a lower cost point without sacrificing the throughput. I think that was a kind of a great three-pronged interview here, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge, Mike.
Yeah, and the other side benefit too is on that offshoring, it's a retention tool for bigger billers. Meaning, I as the owner, I'm investing. If I get you to 2 or 300,000, well, if I invest in someone new, I can probably take that 300,000, a half a million, right, for a relatively low investment, making you stickier to the firm. Because we know a lot of on the perm side, the reason people leave and go off on their own is like, well, geez, Mike was a great guy, but he took me as far as I was going to go with him. I might as well go off on my own. So things like that are not only strategies for business development, they're also great retention strategies.
That's a great point. That's actually, I love that concept right there, because you're basically providing the resources to them to be successful. And if they have to give that resource up, while they might get more percentage point of the deal going to the next shop, if they don't have the resources, the overall deal flow might reduce. So the higher percentage might actually be a step backwards. So I think that's great. Mike, if anyone wants to follow up with you and learn more about this, or maybe get a copy of your book, Grow Your Recruiting Business, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, Grow Your Recruiting Business is on Amazon, but if you buy it, I'll have no way to follow up with it. You can buy it there,
Okay.
uh, but there's Amazon keeps that stuff really tight to the vest. If you want to explore if or how we can help you, I would just send an email to Mike George at the Recruiter U as the university, the recruiteru.com. So that's Mike G at the recruiteru.com. Just say you saw me, um, uh, on the podcast with Dan, and I'll know where you're coming from.
Awesome. We'll get that on page as well, and we will get a link to the Amazon. If
And then the recruiter.com, if they want free resources, you can download. There's a variety of things, templates, things like that.
Awesome.
Blueprint on getting retainers, all that, no charge.
Love that. Love that. I appreciate it. And I guess that mirrors your concept of providing value first. And I love that about you, man. We'll make sure that link is on the page as well, and all of it in the show notes. And again, I'm grateful for your time, Mike. I'm glad to have you here, and I'm sure I'll be following up to do deeper dives into some of these tactics in the future.
Again, I truly appreciate the invitation, and I love having conversations like this. Anytime, Dan.